On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy.
Rossiter, how's life been treating you?
Oh, it's very nice. I had a holiday recently. I had a break from the Youth Outreach Centre in Brixton and I went to the seaside.
So who was looking after the kids?
Oh, don't worry about that. I got someone very trustworthy in. There's a gentleman I know from a mental hospital who has old bandages round his head and he shouts about flying saucers and Jesus. I put him in charge of the kids.
I'm always very impressed by the diligence of young Rossiter and his work with the local authorities. Many congratulations to everyone involved.
I really like the old credits.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Jon Darren. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and twice a week I summon you all into my world like some sort of a fat hippie spider in the middle of a web, so you can join in my expositions about hard science, weird shit and surreality. And we've got a very special show here for you this week, and I hope you enjoy it because I certainly enjoyed filming it. On with the show. I'm very pleased today to have with me a very old friend of mine, and I was shocked earlier today when I was trying to work out how long I'd known him. We've been friends for, I think, 27 years. And it's my great pleasure to bring into my little studio today my old friend Dr Darren Naish. So Darren, you're the dinosaur guy, you're the go-to dinosaur guy, the guy who, after Princess Diana died, I said that Tony Blair would probably name as the people's paleontologist. So, a lot of people within the cryptozoological community believe that dinosaurs are still alive, well and living in all sorts of places, but particularly in the Congo. Discuss.
Yes, thank you, John. Now, the concept of surviving sauropod dinosaurs is a mainstay of the cryptozoological literature, a very familiar idea. And there are several important points that I think people have to take away when they consider the general notion of alleged surviving sauropods. The first one, of course, is dinosaurs are not extinct. We can state this with quite some confidence. Dinosaurs are not extinct. They are still around. You might have eaten part of a dinosaur today.
This is not something of which I approve.
You might have seen one walking around on the street or flying past your window. I am, of course, referring to birds. Birds are dinosaurs. Birds are a subgroup of the predatory dinosaur group, the theropods. Birds are a group of theropods, therefore dinosaurs are not extinct. However, whenever people in the cryptozoological community talk about surviving dinosaurs, they have in mind animals like the alleged surviving sauropod of the Congo region, the Makila Mbembe. And several cryptozoologists, thinking of people like Roy Mackel and Bernard Hoovermans, Cole Schuker, have written quite sympathetically about the idea of various long-necked water monsters from the Congolese region being living sauropods. I think that this idea is not stated clearly enough so badly, sorry, explaining this very badly. I think it's not made clear enough that this idea has its roots in actual legend, not necessarily in real sightings. So what seems to have happened is that European explorers visited various locations across Africa, from the Congolese region all the way down to South Africa, and they discovered that the people in those places had stories about large mysterious water monsters. Many of these stories were collected round about the early 1900s. The early 1900s was a really interesting time in paleontology because it was when the giant skeletons of sauropods like Brontosaurus, Diplodocus and Apatosaurus were being installed in the various museums of the world across the United States, but also in places like Argentina, France, the UK, Russia even. And as a consequence, there was something of a dinosaur craze that happened in the early 1900s. There was this idea that, wow, dinosaurs are really interesting. They're these remarkably large, long-necked, swamp-dwelling animals. That was the view at the time. And what I think happened is that the explorers, hearing about African water monsters, tied those African water monsters, which exist in legend, they tied those to this sauropod craze that was happening at about the same time. If we actually look at these legends of African water monsters, they're very vague. They don't really describe animals that sound especially like sauropods. They are meant to be water dwelling, they're meant to be very big. It's sometimes implied that they're plant eaters, but we don't know much more about them. In fact, we know very little about the original legends on which the entire Makila Mbembe lore is based. Even the term Makila Mbembe itself, we're not even sure exactly what that means. We don't know what specific language it comes from, what culture it belongs to. The descriptions that are said to pertain to Makila Mbembe are vague. Some of them talk about rooster-like combs on the head. Some of them talk about horns on the nose. Some of them talk about frills on the back. It's not clear that we're talking about animals that are necessarily similar to sauropods, even as they were imagined in 1900, in the early 1900s. And another important point that I think people should remember is that this whole idea of sauropod-like animals persisting in Africa, and particularly in the African tropics, was linked quite tightly with the idea, popular during the early 1900s, that Africa was some kind of evolutionary and environmental backwater. It was meant to be some kind of place where the past was very much still alive, where animal species hadn't really changed since prehistoric times, and even where the people themselves were kind of relics of the Stone Age, something that's quite a racist view really of what the peoples of Africa are like, of course. And today we think of this view as couched in colonialism. It was basically an effort to make it seem that Africa as a whole, this enormous continent containing all these different countries, the entire continent was meant to be somehow less good than places like Europe. It was a deliberate effort to make Africa seem, backward and out of time relative to supposedly more advanced places like Europe. So this view that Africa might be home to, prehistoric animals that had survived from, many millions of years ago, goes hand in hand with this colonial model. Is there actually any better evidence for the reality of Makila Mbembe? Well, I think what has happened is that people from the 1900s all the way up to today have retained the idea that Makila Mbembe first of all exists, secondly exists in specific cultures associated with the Congolese region, and thirdly has specific traits that tie it to sauropod dinosaurs. None of those things are necessarily true. The various eyewitness encounters that have been put on record basically since the 1950s aren't really very good. They mostly aren't first-hand eyewitness accounts. They're mostly people talking about the recollections that come from the times of their fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers. And the more modern sightings, and I'm thinking here about those from the 1980s and 90s, are tremendously vague. They're people talking about claiming to see the rounded back and long neck of an animal in the water, supposedly made in a place where we know there are animals like giant turtles and big snakes. So are we really sure that those are descriptions that have anything to do with sauropod dinosaurs. There's no physical evidence that supports the existence of sauropods or sauropod dinosaurs or unusual giant reptiles of any kind, in fact, in the regions concerned. And my take home from this entire subject is that it really is a socio-cultural phenomenon and not really a zoological one.
Regular viewers of the show will, I am sure, not be at all surprised to find out that Darren and I continued talking about the putative lake monsters of West Africa and various other biological issues that the study of these things brings up. And so that will be in next week's episode, because there just wasn't room this time, boys and girls. See. And now I want to introduce you to another old friend of mine, someone I've known for well over 20 years, and who, for nearly all of the run of the Weird Weekends, was the undoubted star of the show. We had him at every weekend from 2004 up until we knocked it on the head 12 years later. I'm sure you can probably guess who it is, but when I say he comes from the Emerald Isle, the land of the bogs and the little people, my dear sweet friend, you know who I'm going to say, don't you? You know I'm going to say my dear sweet friend, Ronan Coughlin. What's your favourite mystery animal?
I don't know. I have a tendency to rather like these lizard men people report. But I mean, I think they're one of the least likely things to actually exist. But I've always enjoyed horror films where something reptilian leaps out of the bushes and bites off the head of a passing maiden. There aren't that many maidens about these days.
Not really, and I've always found much better uses for maidens than biting off their heads. But then again, I'm not a lizard man, so.
Well, maybe we all have a reptilian brain somewhere at the bottom of our general intelligence, and maybe I'm attracted to lizards, humanoid lizards, because of that.
There's nothing at all I could say to that, then.
Well, the thing is...
Sorry, Karen.
The thing is that you have to be after something particularly exotic to really take my fancy. You see, on the blog I do, there's quite a lot of Bigfoot, but I get a bit tired of Bigfoot after a while, and I seek other things. Now, actually, my earliest cryptid that I came upon was in the Beano. Are you familiar with the Beano?
Of course I am.
For the benefit of those who don't know what the Beano is, it is a periodical which features a galère of unlikely characters.
The Beano is an anthology child's comic which was started by D.C. Thompson, publishers in Scotland, in 1938, and it is still going today, although I believe nowadays it's only online. And it contains all sorts of characters, like Dennis the Menace and Minnie the Minx and Biffo the Bear, who basically became icons of British childhood humour and childhood literature for the vast majority of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century. I don't know where my childhood would have been without it. I've been reading it since about 1965, and I still occasionally dip into it today. And along with things like Monty Python's Flying Circus and the Sex Pistols, it's one of those more lowbrow bits of British culture which really shouldn't be underestimated as far as its impact goes.
But back in the old days, and we are now talking about the 50s, it had serious stories in it. And one of them featured Red Rory of the Eagles. The great advantage of Red Rory was the two eagles would grasp him by the hands and lift him up just as the redcoats were coming to get him. It was a sort of Scottish thing. The Beano is made in Scotland. But the thing is, these two eagles, if they had lived in real life, their wings would have interfered with each other when they were carrying him. And they couldn't have carried a boy of about 15 anyway. But on one occasion, Red Rory found himself at a place called the Black Loch. The redcoats were coming after him in a boat, and then suddenly this awesome monster appeared. Now, I was quite small at the time. We're going a long way back. And I didn't realize there were rumors of monsters in lakes, and this thing fascinated me. It was a very artificial looking monster. It looked as though it were more of a dragon, but it certainly kind of quite scared me. Yes, I must have been very small at the time, because the artwork was really quite good. It was in colorful black and white, but it showed a lake monster for the first time. And after that, I got fascinated by lake monsters. I used to ask questions about them of school teachers and other mentally challenged persons. And I had a fascination for those for a long time, particularly after reading Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. There's a terrific battle between a plesiosaur and an ichthyosaur in that. And that again drew my attention to this business of monsters in bodies of water. Bodies of water always seemed mysterious to me. You stood on the shore and looked out, and you didn't know what was swimming underneath. I used to hope there was a monster in the lake at the Dublin Zoo. I didn't realize at the time the lake was an artificial construction and no monster was to be found in it. The nearest thing to a monster.
It is called the Phoenix Park. It ought to have an animal. It ought to have some far out totem animal there, shouldn't it?
Well, I mean, the Phoenix Park contained various monsters because of the political centre in it of the Irish president. So there were always sort of politicians who certainly fit into the category of monsters as far as I'm concerned, particularly at the present time. Do you like politicians, Jonathan? Do you hobnob with them?
I do not like them, but I'm interested in them.
Yes, I'm interested too.
A bit like one would study centipedes, but you wouldn't really want to become socially intimate with them.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it? So, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the end of another show. I hope you enjoyed it. I have a couple of things I want to say before I do my ritual goodbying, and the first of those, I want to go back to talking about striped hawkmoths for a few minutes. You may remember that last week I said how exciting it was that I think it was 9 or 10 specimens have been found in a period of 3 days, when usually you don't get more than 20 or 25 in a year. Well, that figure has now gone up to over 300. They are coming in absolute droves, and I for one find this totally fascinating. We will be returning to this in more detail because there are some other interesting moths that are coming in as well. And I, for one, want to try and see if we can calculate the likelihood or otherwise of, for example, the striped hawkmoth becoming a proper British resident rather than a rare vagrant. Something else, whilst on the subject of hawk moths, that I also want to talk to you about is, you all, I'm sure, have heard of the death's head hawk moth, which is the largest moth ever to be found in Britain, except for obvious escapees of tropical silk moths and things. But the death's head hawk moth is a magnificent insect, and it comes to Britain most years, and always in September, in the autumn. One of the interesting things is that when they come to Britain, they do breed, but the progeny are always sterile. Nobody seems to know why, how, or what the point of this mechanism is, because I believe wholeheartedly that Mother Nature doesn't make mistakes like this. Mother Nature has a plan for everything, and when there is something anomalous happening, there is a reason for it happening. And I'm sure there is a reason for the 3 death's head hawk moths that have turned up in Britain at the end of May. Remember, I said they don't usually come through until September. That is really unusual as far as I'm concerned, and these are the things which I think students of Fortean zoology should be paying far more attention to than idiotic discussions about whether British Bigfoot has a cloaking device like that on Star Trek, and I'm not joking. I was actually asked, could I actually do a feature on that on this show, and I'm trying to think of a way of doing it that's not going to be completely insulting to anybody who believes in this crap. Now, I want to say a big thank you to my guests this week, who were Dr. Darren Naish and Ronan Coghlan, 2 dear friends of mine, 2 stalwarts of the Weird Weekend, whom I hope will be back on the show again very soon. In fact, I know Darren will, I know Ronan will, because I've already recorded segments with them, which will be coming out in due course. But thank you, my dear sweet friends, for appearing on the show. I'm very grateful. I want to say a big thank you to Miss Guinevere, who does all sorts of things, to Louis, our producer, without whom this thing would not be tottering on happily like it does, and to my old friend Kara and the Deputy Director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, Graham Inglis, who has been seriously unwell recently, but even though he's been unwell, he's still looked after me in an admirable fashion. Thank you, Graham, for that, my dear. I also want to say a big thank you to Carl Marshall, the Assistant Director of the CFZ and the person who runs the CFZ Mystery Cat Study Group, because, copperload of this, he has done a mission statement for the CFZ Mystery Cat Study Group, which will tell you more about what we do and why we do it. Now, before we go, couple of other last things really. That's quite surprising how many things there are to do. I was asked recently, could we arrange the books on the CFZ bookstore on the website in a bit more of an easily navigable fashion. I've now done this. For example, look at this. This is the section which holds all the CFZ yearbooks from 1996 to the present day. In fact, I don't even know if we've got the new one in yet, but it will do very soon. And I'm very pleased that whoever it was, and forgive me, I can't remember your name, whoever it was who wanted that. Yes, I can. It was Glenn Vaudrey. He wanted to buy some yearbooks that he hadn't got. Well, Glenn, they're all here now. I'm still trying to work out how to put them in date order or alphabetical order or something, but that's not really too bad, because we've now got all the yearbooks together in one folder. But I'm going now. I will be back on Wednesday. Now, I've actually videoed next Wednesday's show. I think it's a book review, but I can't remember. But that's done. And next Saturday, what will we have for you next Saturday? Well, we will have the return of Darren Naish, with part 2 of his and my long conversation about the biological anomalies that are highlighted in the study of West African lake monsters. And what else will there be? I've got absolutely no idea. I'd like to talk about the influx of weird European moths, but I'm not sure if I'm going to. You're just going to have to wait and see. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you continue to watch and support us. And if you're here next week, I'll be here next week. And I'll be seeing you.